The rise and fall of the Knights of Labor. We are Hawthorne's class of 2018. We will graduate from high school in 2022 and from college in 2026. What kind of jobs will we get? Will computers, robots, and artificial intelligence replace the jobs that our parents had? You might be wondering, why am I talking about the future in a history fair presentation? Our future challenges might not be that different from those faced by our ancestors. I researched how industrialization during the Gilded Age impacted the jobs and lives our ancestors had. I did this research with a focus on the Knights of Labor and specifically my great-grandfather's role as a Union leader in the Chicago stockyards. The growth of Chicago from the 1850s to 1920 was astonishing. The population went from 30,000 people to 2.7 million people. By 1856, Chicago was the greatest railroad center in the world, and known as the Gateway to the West, and was the gateway west for both migrants and for goods that were processed to be sent west. But what was good for manufacturers wasn't always good for workers. As factories grew, skilled craftsmen were often replaced by machines. Instead of jobs for skilled craftsmen, most jobs available were for workers to operate the machines. Many workers were immigrants who were discriminated against and treated even worse. Chicago's growth was so rapid that the city couldn't keep up with the needs of all these people, so the government struggled to help with the workers. Most people worked 12 to 14 hours every day, 6 days a week. A federal law required an 8-hour workday, but this law was not enforced. Instead, employers required workers to sign a waiver giving away their right to an 8-hour workday. Workers who did not sign this waiver were not hired. In the stockyard, things were getting worse. The work being done in the stockyards had increased from 2 million animals being processed per year in 1870 to almost 9 million animals per year. The amount of work being done increased, but the wages did not. That's because the profit margin on meat was small. Packers couldn't control the cost of livestock or the sale price of meat. Labor was a cost that they could control. Packers cut costs by creating an assembly line of workers to each play a role. By breaking down the work into many small pieces, the packers could have unskilled workmen do more of the work. This gave the skilled workers, the splitters, butchers, and skinners, more power over the unskilled workers and better pay. In today's money, the unskilled workers would make less than $3.70 per hour. With populations rising and new immigrants coming daily, unskilled workers who went on strike could easily be replaced. It was harder to replace the skilled workers. In 1865, the first stockyard opened in Chicago. 4 years later, a group of tailors in Philadelphia created a secret society, the Knights of Labor. Their motto was, "An injury to one is a concern of all." The Knights of Labor were different from prior unions because they welcomed everyone, regardless of trade. They believed in solidarity among all workers. Whether white or black, skilled or unskilled, man or woman, they tried to teach the American wage earner that he was a wage earner first and a bricklayer, carpenter, miner, shoemaker, a Catholic, Protestant, Jew, white, black, Democrat, Republican after. In 1879, Terence Potterly became the Grand Master Workman of the Knights of Labor and helped write their Declaration of Principles. Potterly worked on a platform of abolishing child labor and an 8-hour workday, equal pay for equal work, and a political reform. Potterly stated that he would never advocate for a strike unless it was a strike at the ballot box. The principles of Declaration state that the Knights of Labor would shorten the workday to 8 hours, but did not want a full strike for an 8-hour workday. The leader of the Knights of Labor, Terence Potterly, tried to stop the May Day strike for the 8-hour work. One of the first charters for a Knights of Labor local was obtained by my great-great-grandfather, a Chicago butcher named John T. Joyce. It was for the District Assembly 57 and was filed in 1882. Joyce immigrated from Ireland to the United States in 1880 and worked as a butcher and a union organizer in the Union stockyards of Chicago. In 1884, he worked with the Knights of Labor to try and start a butchers' union in the Swift meatpacking plant. Starting in 1884, the Federation of Organized Trades began planning a nationwide strike for an 8-hour workday. They chose May 1st, 1886 as the date of the strike and had 2 years to plan. Potterly and the Knights of Labor were not in favor of a strike. Powderly asked the workers to write a short essay on the 8-hour workday instead of striking. However, the Chicago members disagreed with Powderly and thought a strike was the best way to get an 8-hour workday. On May 1st, 1886, 300,000 workers across the country protested for an 8-hour workday. Chicago was the heart of the movement, and 30,000 to 40,000 workers in Chicago went on strike for an 8-hour workday. The May 1st protests were peaceful. The Akron Beacon-Journal later interviewed Joyce about his role in the fight for an 8-hour workday. Joyce explained that he headed a committee whose goal was to demand decent wages. The committee decided that they would call on Swift Armor and Company in Morris, state the case for an 8-hour workday, and then demand an immediate answer on the threat of calling a strike of all stockyard workers. At 9:10 a.m. on May 3, 1886, Joyce and his committees arrived at various Packers offices. 15 minutes later, they reported back that the Packers would not even consider their demands. Joyce explained what happened next. "We called a strike which affected 45,000 men and women in the industry. Everyone quit his post. At 10:20 a.m., the strike was settled, the Packers agreeing to our demands. That was the start of our 8-hour workday union in America." The headline in one newspaper read, "It is an 8-hour boom, and we are scoring victory after victory. Today, the packing houses of the Union stockyards all yielded. Men are wild with joy in the grand victory they have gained." The celebration soon changed to a shock over a tragedy at the labor demonstration at McCormick Reaper's Works factory in Chicago. The police and guards have been harassing strikers at the McCormick Reaper plant. On May 3, 1886, strikers at the McCormick Reaper began throwing rocks at police. The police fired at the strikers, killing at least 2 and wounding many more. In response to the murders at the McCormick factory, a rally was planned at the Haymarket Square. The weather that night was not good, so only about 1,200 people showed up. The crowd was calm, listening to speakers, including a speech by Chicago's Mayor Carter Harrison. 180 police officers also showed up. Mayor Harrison instructed police not to disturb the meeting. As the meeting was ending, the police marched into the crowd. Somebody threw a bomb at the police, and the police began firing wildly. 8 officers were killed, 60 were injured. It is not known how many protesters were killed or injured. 8 people were found guilty, even though there was evidence that some people were not even at the rally. All 8 were sentenced to death. 4 were hanged, 1 committed suicide. The governor of Illinois eventually pardoned the other 3, and the trial was considered one of the worst miscarriages of justice in the country's history. Afterwards, the labor unions faced public backlash and mistrust. They also had to fight to hold on to the 8-hour workday. The Knights of Labor and the Chicago Stockyard Unions continued to disagree. In the fall of 1886, the Packers started to take back the 8-hour workday. Powderly told the workers to give up their 8-hour workday. He wanted them to wait for other cities to get their 8-hour workday. District 57 wouldn't give it up, and Joyce didn't want the Chicago Yards to give up the 8-hour workday without a fight. Joyce and District 57 called the strike. It was working. Powderly negotiated with the Packers behind District 57's back and called off the strike. By 1900, the number of members in the Knights of Labor had significantly declined. One reason was the Haymarket Massacre. Mismanagement and internal fighting also caused the decline, as seen in how Powderly treated the Chicago workers. What's next for John T. Joyce? John Joyce continued to organize workers in packing houses throughout the Midwest. Joyce was one of the founders of the Amalgamated Meat Cutters and Butcher Workmen Union.